Can Strangles bounce back after big drops? What do you think?
Sponsored by the CBOE, by the way. CBO, sorry. I'm going to have to say yes, Sadnaf. I mean, just look at what happened here. But now I'm going to say, if you're being mechanical, it's going to be a much more of a gray area.
Okay, I'm going to make this easier for you because that's not a fair question.
Okay.
If you were to do a strangle in an equity or you do a strangle in an index, which has a greater chance of bouncing back? That's what I meant to say.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to say the index, Osnoff, just because of the nature of how many stocks are in there. I'm going to have to say that. Now, please don't make me look bad and make this a trick question. And you already saw the answer. You would have answered it exactly the same way I did, and we're going to be wrong.
Let's go to the first slide.
Oh, God, he's slow playing me again. It's Taiwan all over again.
For 45 days to expiration, 16 Delta short SPY strangles, the probability of a turnaround drops to roughly 50% once the P&L has reached negative 50% of the initial credit or lower. That's what our definition of when you're down. So what is the turnaround probability for strangles with different types of underlyings after incurring the same amount of a loss? So once you're down in excess of 50% of the credit that you received, what are the chances of a turnaround? And then are contracts with more extreme P&L swings more or less likely to recover? And as Tony said, he said they're less likely to recover.
Oh, boy.
You can change your answer now.
No, I'm going to stick with what I had.
Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide.
You're amazing. What's your answer?
I already know the answer. We looked at SPY, Qs, Gold, Amazon, Apple, Google for 10 years. 16 Delta short strangles. And we looked when the position had a P&L less than 50% of the initial credit and has a P&L turnaround after incurring a loss. All right, let's go to the next slide. Here we go. So strangles with more volatile underlyings tend to have greater profit potential, but they also tend to have more volatile P&Ls, and they are more likely to have a negative P&L swing larger than 50% of the initial credit. For example, Apple strangles carry the highest large loss risk, while SPY carries the lowest, making the ETFs like SPYs and Qs generally safer than individual stocks. So you were right, Mr. Batista.
Yes.
What's interesting here is that when you look at Apple, Gold, Amazon, QQQ, Google, and SPY, I never would have thought Apple has the most risk.
I wouldn't have either.
Of course, judging from today, I would say it does for sure. But I never would have guessed that. But it's significant compared to others. Apple at 22%, SPY at 13%. That's a pretty big difference. Let's go next slide. So when we analyze the profit rates and loss range, SPY offers the best risk-return profile with high profits, 74%, and the probability of low total losses, 5%, due to broad diversification. Apple demonstrated the riskiest with the highest probability of total loss, 10%, and the lowest profits. Gold showed strong profits with few losses, indicating more decisive outcomes. I have not had that experience in gold recently. But anyway, you can see right here, Apple clearly being the worst of all these stocks. 16 Delta Strangle, 45 days to expiration, closed prior to 21. And the probability of having a loss, a total loss, okay, Apple obviously still the worst. Really surprising.
It is, agreed.
Let's go to the next slide. So more volatile underlyings like individual stocks also tend to have a lower probability of P&L turnaround after incurring a loss of 50%. This means that strangles are prone to larger negative P&L swings that are prone to larger negative P&L swings are less likely to recover, and generally loss tolerances should be more conservative with more volatile underlyings. Essentially saying there's some stocks that are fairly unlikely to come back, while other ones, they may.
Makes sense. I'm going to assume the ones with higher implied volatility.
The ones with higher implied volatility just don't come back as much as the ones with lower implied volatility.
That's correct.
Yep. Let's go to the next slide. It is important to note that this study is focused within the first half of a contract's duration, as opposed to the second half, when P&L swings are more dramatic. Holding a contract past 21 DT also gives a strangle more time to recover, so these probabilities will change significantly depending on management strategy. We covered everything in 21 days. Last slide, please. So here are really good takeaways. Strangles with more volatile underlyings, while they tend to deliver larger credits and greater profit potential, also tend to have more volatile P&Ls and larger negative P&L swings. Strangles that are prone to larger negative P&Ls are also less likely to recover and should generally have more conservative loss tolerances. All of this totally true. However, you make 2 or 3 times as much money with the stocks that have more volatility. So especially this market, when we could trade stocks with 50 or 75% volatility when the S&P is 25, and you have 2 or 3 times the amount of money to make. So don't be just
don't be pigeonholed into this one study. Sure.
Well, don't be seduced into thinking that I shouldn't trade anything without volatility, because you make a lot more money with volatility and you can trade smaller.